Well, they say that's kind of cheap, isn't it? How fancy is it that you can just kind of believe in a Jesus thing and then all your sins are erased and gone? They go bye-bye. That's pretty cheap, isn't it? Doesn't it sound rather imaginative? Well, here's the thing. It's not cheap. It's actually really expensive. Now, you get grace for free, but grace was not free. It was a very high price. The highest price grace could cost was the price of God's Son, a price that none of you would do for someone else who sinned against you. None of you would offer up your son or your daughter to be brutally murdered and tortured on behalf of someone else who's done you wrong. Nobody would do that. Grace isn't cheap. Grace cost a lot. It was expensive. It's free to you. It's free. It's free for all who believe, but it's not cheap. Matter of fact, really, it's not just that God erases sin. You know, that's kind of the way we think about it. Like, you could put my sins on a board, and then if I believe in Jesus and go through this cool ritual thing or something and say it, repeat a prayer after a pastor, then God just goes up to the board and he just erases them. That's not what happens at salvation. At salvation, what happens is your sins are not merely erased like on a dry erase board. They were punished onto Christ. Because here's the thing. You've heard that God is a good God, and that if he's good and he's fair, then that means he must judge equally. With an equal measuring rod, he must judge. Well, he does judge. All sins, you can write this down, this is a really important statement. All sins will be punished equally. All sins. All sins will be punished equally. Even yours. Now think about what it means that people will actually sit under the eternal wrath of God in a torture chamber specifically created for them. Think about the fact that there will be people that receive a glorified body not to experience heaven's eternal bliss, but a glorified body that can't decay but is always dying eternally without dying. That's how terrible sin is. That's the cost of that's how much it cost. So for all sin to be punished equally, what does that mean for you and I? Because we don't have to go through that, do we? You're not going to hell for eternity. You will not be under God's judgment for eternity if you're a believer. How is that possible? It's because Jesus paid your eternity in hell in a moment because he's infinite and eternal. He paid it in a moment. Your eternal price that you owed, your eternal debt to God that you would have paid for millions of years upon eons of millions of years, Christ paid that in a moment. He dies on a cross, and he could do that because he is eternal. He is infinite. So it's not like this. It's not like this. Sometimes I try to help Amber out around the house. It's been a while since I've done that. And so I'm going to sweep. I'm going to mop. What else do I do when I do that? Dishes. No, I don't do that. Clothes. Okay. Well, let's pretend that I do that. All right, so I'm going to sweep. I'm going to help her out. It's been a rough couple weeks. I'm going to help her out. I'm going to sweep. She's going to come home, and I'm going to have the house cleaned up. So I'm going to sweep. Now, here's what I used to do when I was growing up with my dad. Get that broom out there, you know. And some of you kids, y'all are still doing this because you get chore money, so you do this. Get the broom out. You're really just spot brooming, spot mopping. But you get that dust and you just take that rug or that couch, you just sweep it under the rug there, right? And then you just put the rug back down. Or if you can just sweep it under the couch, then hey, they got to get it later. That's on them, but I still get my chore money. That's what I do. When I clean for Amber, that's kind of what I do. And the problem is the dirt's not gone. Matter of fact, when she goes to lift up the rug, she's going to find out that I wasn't helping her out. I was making her job worse. The dirt's all still there. But Christians typically think about grace like the dirt under the rug idea, that God erases it with his cool, magic, divine eraser. He can't do that. If God was to just erase your sin with a magical divine eraser, He would be unjust to overlook your sin and say, come on in, Donald Cope, I'm just going to turn the blind eye to your sin. God would be unjust to overlook your sin. God would be an evil judge to turn the blind eye to your sin and say, hey, I like this guy, come on in. I don't like that guy, you're going to be punished. He can't do that because, why? Because all sin will be punished equally. For the lost person, their sin will be punished eternally under His wrath in a torture chamber specifically created for them with a glorified body. This is terrible. For you, for the believer, your sin must be punished equally, or God is unjust. He's unfair. He's unrighteous. He's unholy. He's not a good God. He's an evil God, an evil judge. The way that your sin is punished equally is that Jesus bore the eternal wrath of God in your place, on your part. Now that's a gospel worth being excited about. That's a real message of hope. Not the dirt under the rug stuff, not the God with the magical dry erase board eraser thing and the chalkboard. That's a cheap presentation of the gospel. The gospel that we actually believe in, the biblical gospel, is a message of love and hope and peace that should inspire all peoples to desire to follow a God that could possibly love them this much. Who could die for my sins? Who could take my place under God's wrath? Who of you would do that for me? Only a God. Only a Jesus who infinitely, eternally cares for you, loves for you outrageously. Only a real gospel, a real message of hope. And that message of hope makes guilty people guiltless.